morning. This is Roberto. I decided to make a couple of videos presenting my art practice. And so what I'm going to attempt is to do one video per body of work so I can get into the details of the context and the background that informed the creation of the collection, some of the free associations I started building upon such context, how they became a visual product. I'll be touching upon a little bit also on my process, and also, presenting the images themselves. I hope you find this interesting. I love doing these little talks. So also, in a way, I had the opportunity to present my practice in a gallery in New York. So sadly, it wasn't recorded. And so I received some comments that maybe I should record a similar one afterwards. So this is precisely, this is my attempt at doing that. So in this clip, I'm going to talk about a collection I made in 2021. It's called The End of Facts. It's a series comprised of 16 pieces. I have to say, all of them stem from the same image. It was an advertisement that I scanned at some point. I found it on a magazine. If I'm very specific, it's a Penthouse magazine from 1978 that I found by accident, and so I took that scanned image of that advert, and I basically made a full deletion or an attack on it somehow, and then made these 16 variations out of it. So that's more or less the general perspective on the collection, and let's get on to a little bit of the context. So as you may well know, 2021 we were at the height of the COVID pandemic, and as many of you, I was spending a disproportionate amount of time online. So again, one of the first observations I've got was that there was a weird disconnect between the internet as a space, especially social networks, and then the world in real life. And that was already very telling in itself, that something was happening, and it really caught my interest, and also became the owner of my concerns, to be honest, and also a little bit of context. I'm from Mexico, so I'm looking at a cultural conversation happening in the States from the perspective of my country. I believe I'm somehow privileged in the sense that I can really understand the American context and American media. I've grown my whole life with it, whether it's of course just news, music, literature, art itself. And so I'm very connected, but at the same time completely alien to it, and I believe that informs how I understand it in many ways. And that's also the reason why I'm making these videos in English, because I'm very interested in participating in that conversation. So I believe that it seems natural. So please forgive me if it's not for any other reason. And on the future, I'm pretty sure I'm going to make some content in Spanish. So I started just observing this constant outrage and this very hyperbolic rhetoric online, and it almost seemed as if reality was somehow fragmented or balkanized to such an extent that some people starting having a really hard time imagining that there was another narration going on or another possibility of meaning, basically another perspective that was also valid, or at least as valid as the ones they were espousing. So, it got to the point where, as I started investigating this, that I had actually 2 different email accounts that calibrated somehow the algorithmic results of my YouTube queries. So I could, with one account, I only search for to give an example, why the left is fantastic, and with the other account, I was just looking at why the right is fantastic, and etc. So I started really having very different results from my search, and I just keep furthering that exercise over time until it really reached a point of horror, in the way that literally we were talking about 2 completely different realities or informational worlds or spheres. And so I started realizing that I was witnessing a schizoid media, that was getting so good at sending digital, algorithmic, customized or tailored information, that was curated to such an extent that people actually began inhabiting their own island of meaning, to a certain degree. And apparently several of those islands lacked a bridge. So then I was considering how stories have maintained the social tissue of societies. They are a symbolic kind of glue, like a substance that brings groups of people together. They stabilize the real to a point that they facilitate acquaintances and exchanges. So, of course, tradition and religion, folklore, have those stabilizing functions. Also, I was born I grew up in the 80s, and at least here in Mexico, we had a couple of newspapers only and a couple of TV channels, right? That's before the digital age. And it wasn't that difficult to go to a party or a dinner and meet people for the first time and share perspectives or opinions, and more or less, all of them weren't necessarily shocking, because there was somehow a predictable quality, to the stories everybody was narrating. But I believe that was completely destroyed, when social networks came in and algorithmic content curation started operating and started becoming incredibly efficient. So these things brought to mind I think it was a scientific study or paper somewhere that said that the sons and daughters of parents who were incredibly obsessive about hygiene and, for instance, were overusing the sanitizing gel, etc. Then those kids had problem as teenagers with allergies, as if they, in an immunological level, they didn't have the toolkit to deal with differences, to deal with a different set of pathogens or threats, and that was poignant to me, because it brought to mind what I was witnessing. It's apparently our info spheres are so balkanizing and become so specific and so self-reinforcing that whenever we encounter another and it's implied different perspectives and stories, the only possibility we have as a reaction is an allergic one. It's almost, it's always, like the shock and the horror of the other. And it's interesting in a way, from a society that is somehow very interested in other modes of knowledge. It seems to me like a slight contradiction there. So those islands of meaning without bridges transform our modes of acquaintance and made them extremely difficult, and somehow eroded the symbolic social tissue of communities and brought them apart. And that mechanism being deeply embedded in digital dynamics, I think it's an incredibly important and urgent topic. So also this notion, like whoever is not agreeing or coming from the same informational perspective, it seemed to me like we're just turning them into a kind of informational leper, right? Immediately described as ignorant, and not only that, but almost like dehumanized to the point that they actually deserve to be erased. Or taken instantly to a fringe space of ridicule. And that also, it's contrary to an idea of progress and to an idea of new humanism, and it runs against notions of solidarity that are worrisome to me. If I now describe a different perspective, I have an old memory. I understand this as poetic images, and I have to say, when I say something is beautiful, it's from a poetic point of view. Like an image can be horrifying, but it still has a notion of the sublime, a notion of such a potency or strength that it's still awe-inspiring. So I remember I was 8 years old, probably. It was the 25th of December after the holidays, and I was walking in the street early in the morning. The streets were littered with little paper bits all over the place, and just as I walked through them, by them, I stared at them, and it was just little charred pieces of newsprint, that contained a fragment of a photograph, or some little some printed words that maybe at some point were part of an op-ed, or just journalism. And I have to say that here fireworks or crackers are made with newsprint. They are hand rolled like an Habano cigar, and then they explode, and it's a very telling image of somehow the physicality of media and messages in general, and then to be able to have it explode and become something unrecognizable and fragmented was incredibly, it just captured me, and really inspired this series. I was walking the streets, witnessing the ashes of meaning to a point. So yeah, and also I was thinking about this weird delay, between the witnessing of a photograph or an image that is posted online and its meaning, and how difficult it is, how basically the images are somehow traveling faster than their meaning. The meaning is left behind. So I just understood them at some point as images traveling at the speed of light, like lightning. Yes, an instant flash of visual substance. And the meaning arrived, if ever, with a delay of thunder, it being slower. And I also thought of the boom of thunder as an analogy of the shock of understanding where someone is coming from, what is actually informing their perspectives. So that, I think you know me by now, that stopped me on my tracks, and I just began working. In a more formal sense, I have written a statement that I think is still a little bit more technical than I would like it to be. But I quoted this sentence from Orwell from 1984 that says, like, everything faded into mist, the past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, the lie became truth. And it felt also adept, and further describe the sensation I was having internally. Some other free associations I was having at the time was like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, crashing particles against one another, and I was just thinking about crashing rhetorical structures against one another, meaning crashing against one another, and how maybe the signifiers will just sparkle like dust going under a source of light, and then that dust, what happens after it just settles like mud on a fish tank, or just this dust finally encountering a resting point on the floor, was this idea of it being now unrecognizable, fragmented, and incomplete. This vertigo of meaningless images coming towards us at a great speed. So that's I think I cannot be more thorough regarding the context, the symbols, the associations I was having when I was making this series. Regarding the process, I have to say I'm not a coder. Again, I'm more a poet and a visual artist, and but I was researching ways that I could manipulate images with an algorithm, without going directly into code. I needed an interface still, and of course I quickly realized that most of our tools already include them. They're embedded in them, such as Lightroom for photo editing or Photoshop itself. Lightroom has a function in which, if you want to stitch a panorama, you have an image that is somehow similar, right, to another. You select both of them and you apply the panorama function, and somehow it makes sense of the image and make it seamless. What I started doing was selecting completely disparate images that were absolutely hopeless in their in it being joined in a seamless manner, and the results were, in my opinion, fantastic. There was like, I call it an active surface, a new painterless surface appearing before me, and that's called the patch match algorithm. And so it's a correspondence algorithm that tries to make sense of images and just generate smooth, logical surfaces. So then I started playing with Photoshop and started just like stretching and distorting the advertisement I scanned, and I got to the point where I was just recording little actions, which is basically recording what you're doing with the keyboard and the mouse. And then you are able to store them and then play them back again. So I started playing them over and over and over and over till suddenly, in a very surprising way, I started having results. And that's what's in the series. I really like that way of working. It's somehow, I call it like being in the center. I have the possibility to access the algorithmic tools, but I'm not only looking at things from the perspective of a coder, and I am still able to use some physical gestures regarding making something very small, very big, several times until the image just breaks up and decomposes and becomes almost gorgeous again, like a rebirth. So that was an accident, a process as accident that I stumbled upon that I'm very fond of. I like how the results are very painterly, their abstractness, how they are denying any other meaning that they themselves being a kind of a galaxy of the debris of an image. So when I started experiencing them in that manner, I said, okay, this is definitely something I'm happy with. So I don't know. I think this is more or less what I wanted to express at this point. I hope you enjoy this series of videos I will be making. Please, if you feel like leaving a comment, I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, I would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna be I'm making a commitment to publish more often, and I would not only talk about my own work, but also just make works on video soon, which I hope they're interesting, and also interested in hosting conversations with all different kinds of people, and let's see how that goes. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.